They did an experiment in order to measure how AQUA4D was impacting the leaching effect. Here, basically, we're having an impact with irrigation dose, the fact that you have a plant, here in that case, it was barley in the pots. And the third variable is the fact that you have AQUA4D or you don't have AQUA4D. We're going to be looking at the macro-porosity of the soil, okay, which are the bigger pores in the soil. And we're going to be looking at the impact on the soil micro-porosity, which is like 20 times smaller than the macro-porosity. So first we look at the microscopic scale, which is really, really little scales, and which is basically made for water retention. And here is the impact. It's very visual. We can see that the AQUA4D side really has been able to increase this micro-porosity. If we look at it in figures, we can see here that we basically have been able always to increase the micro-porosity as much as like 60%. So that explains where we're having more water retention. It comes from there, the fact that we're able to modify the soil micro-porosity. If I keep going and now I look at the macro-porosity, which basically are bigger pores of the soil that are there to drain the water, well, here we can see again that the AQUA4D has increased this porosity, this macro-porosity in the soil, okay? If we look at it with figures, it was this time more around 30% that we're able to increase the macro-porosity. So micro-porosity, we're able to increase all the way up to 60% on average. And with the macro-porosity, it was more around 30%. Here is just to go a little bit more into details. This is the way they classify pores in the soil, okay? So you have tubular voids that are macro or micro cracks, packing voids, okay? So if we look into details at what type of porosity we had an impact on, first on the microscopic scales, so the tiny scales, the little scales. We can see here that the AQUA4D side basically always had a strong impact on those packing voids. So the pores we had an impact on are the pores that are there to store water, okay? So this was really, really interesting for us, and it explained everything we'd been able to see. So we always saw in our projects that we're able to manage to store more water in the soil, and we always had to monitor it and to have clients adapting to it. And here we started to understand how and why it was happening. If you look at the macro-porosity here, you can see it's not as clear where we had the impact. I would say interesting to see always that those tubular voids always had an increase. Okay, it's easy to see because it's that bottom of the pile. And those are really, like, as I mentioned, those are really those chimneys made to drain the water. And so having those two things going together, we understood why we were having that ability to have a really, really impressive leaching effect, and at the same time, having a really important ability to retain moisture in the soil.